In November 2001, as many as 2,000 prisoners are believed to have been murdered by U.S. allied Afghan troops and buried in a mass grave in Dasht-e Leilli, Afghanistan. These Afghan troops were operating jointly with American forces. The New York Times has revealed that the Bush administration blocked at least 3 separate investigations into these alleged war crimes. This revelation comes after nearly 8 years of advocacy and investigation by Physicians for Human Rights. Citing a former FBI agent and other sources, The Times reports that beginning in 2002, senior Bush administration officials obstructed a series of criminal probes by the FBI, Defense Department, and State Department. This story begins in northern Afghanistan, November 2001, when thousands of Taliban and foreign fighters surrendered to U.S. Special Forces and the troops of Afghan warlord General Abdul Rashid Dostum, a notoriously brutal U.S. ally in the Northern Alliance. The prisoners were promised they would not be harmed.
Instead, Dostum packed them in shipping containers where they were carried in a convoy through the desert. According to U.S. government documents obtained by PHR, up to 2,000 people died during that convoy. They were buried at a place called Dasht-e Leilli, which is a mass grave site near Shebran, Afghanistan.
PHR discovered the grave while we were investigating the conditions at the Shebran prison in northern Afghanistan. Our team found conditions at that prison to be absolutely deplorable. There were 3,000 prisoners in an overcrowded place that lacked heat, adequate nutrition. Prisoners were dying of illness and lack of sanitation and hunger. At the time, our investigators also heard stories about a mass grave right near the prison, and they saw some of the outlines of such a site. So under the auspices of the UN, our International Forensic Program conducted an initial examination of a part of the grave, exhumed some bodies, and conducted autopsies, and found those deaths were consistent with suffocation.
First privately and then publicly, PHR appealed to U.S. and Afghan authorities to fully investigate this alleged massacre. They called for evidence to be preserved and witnesses protected. Despite these appeals, Afghan eyewitnesses were tortured, murdered, or simply disappeared.
The Pentagon had said that only a few dozen prisoners had died during transport of their wounds or of disease. The Pentagon also said that they had verbally debriefed the Special Forces when they returned from Afghanistan and didn't need to do further investigation.
Not only was the incident not investigated, but that year, General Dostum was brought into the Afghan government as Deputy Defense Minister under President Hamid Karzai. And it has now been revealed that General Dostum was actually on the payroll of the CIA. 2 of Dostum's supporters were Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Paul Wolfowitz. According to the New York Times, officials told Wolfowitz that Dostum may have committed a war crime. Wolfowitz said they would not go after him for that.
It was the policy of the U.S. and Afghan government to bring in the Afghan warlords, many of whom were alleged war criminals and were the cause of the mass graves across Afghanistan, to bring them into the government.
A few survivors of the Dasht-e Leilli massacre were transported to Guantanamo Bay, where Del Spry served as special agent in charge of FBI interrogations.
According to the New York Times, Special Agent Spry and his team of FBI agents at Guantanamo interviewed 10 detainees. Special Agent Spry submitted this information to FBI headquarters in Washington, but he was ordered not to investigate.
In August 2002, Newsweek magazine, using information provided by PHR, published an exclusive cover story detailing allegations about the massacre. The release of this story pressured the U.S. and Afghan governments to publicly voice support for a joint investigation, but when the State Department attempted to launch this investigation, the Bush White House shut them down.
So over the next few years, PHR waited for an investigation to take place at the Dasht-e Leilli grave. We at the same time worked with the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission to train Afghan justice, police, and forensics people in the techniques for documenting graves. And we started exercise to map all the mass graves in Afghanistan. Our biggest fear all along was that someone might tamper with the Dasht-e Leilli grave and destroy the evidence up there. And at the same time, we kept seeking information from the US government, from the Afghan government, about the Dasht-e Leilli grave and what happened up there.
With the White House continually blocking their requests for information and investigation, PHR had only one option left. In 2006, they filed a Freedom of Information Act request seeking all U.S. government documents related to Dasht-e Leilli. After being stonewalled for more than a year, PHR took legal action to force the government to comply.
We sued, and finally we received documents that indicated the U.S. government believed up to 2,000 prisoners died during the Dasht-e Leilli incident.